When I think about it, I spend a lot of time in chairs. At work I have a pretty nice chair, which isn't surprising considering I'm in the H&S, and we promote ergonomic chairs. And of course at work I spend more time than I should at the computer. Sadly at home, I also spend more time than I should at the computer. However, my chair at home is much worse for the wear. In fact, one of the arms is almost completely broken off. A day or two ago, I had a really annoying experience with my motorcycle. It went something like this, dudes included. Dude, why are you wearing a jacket? It's 102 degrees out here, man. I'm wearing the jacket because it's 102 degrees out here. Man, you're gonna cook in that jacket. Actually, I'll cook if I don't wear the jacket. Sometimes I forget people just don't understand physics. So let's remember that heat transfers naturally through conduction, convection, and radiation. If you want to add just a little bit more to it, of course you've got advection, diffusion, phase change, which really all are the first three, but they're kind of special concepts, so you box them up sometimes. In all the natural processes, you have to remember that heat is always going from somewhere where it's hot to somewhere where it's colder. Now, of course, this could be hot and hot, or cold and cold, but always the heat energy is going from a hot to a colder within whatever spectrum you're looking at. Conduction is when you have something physically touching something else from a hot surface to a cold surface. In an ideal riding condition world, for us, that would be your hot skin versus a very thin layer of molecules of air right along your skin. Convection is basically the movement of that heat energy through medium, through the environment. That hot air near my skin, if left to its natural devices, because it expands, it gets more buoyant and it will rise up away from my skin. In the process, drawing some cold air in to replace it. Radiation is basically what it sounds like. It's the thermal energy coming off of my warm skin as an EM wave going and hitting something. So, for instance, when you're sitting by a fireplace and you have your hands, you can feel the heat even though you're not touching the fire, even if there's like a screen between you and the fire. Now I want to bring in phase change for just a moment because it's important to us too. So in phase change, you're looking at the specific heat necessary to sublime or to melt or to evaporate. And a little bit of that water evaporates. That means it basically turns from a liquid to a gas. When that happens, a certain amount of energy is extracted from the skin to help it phase change between a liquid and a gas. Now here's where the physics get a little bit more difficult to follow if you're not thinking about it carefully. Our bodies inside are 98, 99 degrees because of the metabolism that's going on inside of our body all the time that we have to live. Our skin is not 98 degrees. Our skin is trying to be a radiator for our body, kind of like how you have a radiator for your CPU. It's trying to get rid of that excess heat. All the transfer processes are going on at the same time, so it's kind of hard to say this is happening and this is happening and da-da-da. So that's what makes it hard to physically explain or understand this without really thinking about it. But you've got warm skin. The skin is trying to radiate, so the skin is constantly radiating some energy as EM energy. Likewise, at the same time, this entire room or the entire environment is radiating energy back at me and it's warming my skin back up. In a room like this, where the walls and everything are about the same temperature as my skin, the net change between me and the walls really isn't much. So radiation isn't a big effect while I'm indoors. So when I go outdoors, my skin is now competing with the entire environment, including the sun. And realistically, I'm going to gain heat from the sun in my environment, especially as the temperature outside goes up and the trees are warmer, the ground is warmer, the car next to me is warmer. I'm getting more radiant heat delivered to my body than I'm letting out of my body. So anything I can do to blanket and insulate that radiant heat really helps. So that's the first reason to wear a jacket when it's really hot outside, is because everything that you look at is supplying heat to you for the radiant energy. The second aspect is also a little bit complicated. It has to do with convection and some of the heat transfer that goes on with that. I've got my skin here, and if we could really zoom in and expand out the air that was right next to my skin. Right next to the skin, the air is about the same temperature as my skin, which is warmer than it is in the room. And a little bit further away from that, it gets a little colder, a little colder, a little colder, a little colder. So you get, this reasonable distance away. In a room like this, where I've got the fans off so that there's no noise, the air is not moving very much. I've actually got a fairly decent sized envelope around my body where it's warm around my body as compared to the rest of the room. Sometimes if you have the right conditions, you can almost feel it. But you have to be careful because you're also dealing with radiant heat. So what that means is it's harder for that transfer to occur because the really warm skin is right next to the really warm air. Their temperature difference isn't much, so the transfer of heat between the two isn't going to be a whole lot. And you keep going out. So I'm insulated. And actually it's like I'm wearing clothes, only it's the air that's around it that's slowing that transfer of heat through conduction/convection to my environment. Now, if I were to turn on the fan, or if I were to go riding, air will start moving across my skin, and it'll actually help move away the actual particles that are warmer, and actually get that envelope closer to my body. And if it's less like 70 degrees, that's great, because the air that's coming in is colder than the air that's being pushed away. So the temperature difference is better, and so the heat transfers more quickly from the skin to the cooler air that's being brought in. As I move my hand past my arm, I can feel it happening. We call this wind chill. However, again, remember, heat goes from where it's warmer to where it's cooler. The air that's around me is also in the 90 to 100 degree range. Now I'm taking this in a reverse situation where energy is flowing from the air back to my arm. So I've got an insulation layer where it's warmer up here and gets cooler as it gets closer to my skin. Again, this is all relative because the skin's 80 degrees or so. The air is now 100 degrees. But there'll still be this insulated shell kind of thing going. But when I move that out of the way, now I'm taking the warmer air and getting it closer to the skin. Distance is less. The heat transfer goes from the air to the skin faster. We call this a convection oven. So the hotter it gets, the less I want air flowing past my skin because that's actually bringing hotter air closer to my skin. And lastly, we have phase change. For us, that's pretty much evaporative cooling is what we're talking about. So again, if I've got water on the surface of my skin, I don't have water in the air, naturally, through evaporation, the water wants to go from my skin to the air. But more important is how humid is the air around it. So again, there's this complicated realm of I've got to have some air moving to help move the humidity through so that I'm not getting cooked. But I've also got to keep the hot air from directly impacting and blowing on my skin and delivering all that energy to my skin. So really, when it starts getting over about 90 degrees, you have to wear a jacket if you really want to be able to keep your temperature down. Now, one of the things that happens if you're not wearing a jacket is your body will sweat more because it's evaporating more, although it's not helping you because the convection is causing it to heat up more. So you'll lose the ability to sweat, and then you'll basically get into heat stroke. So it's actually important to keep the rate of respiration down if possible. And in these intermediate range temperatures where we're talking heat indexes of 100, 105, 110 maybe, you want a little flow to help move the humidity out of the jacket. But you don't want so much flow that you're bringing all the heat and impacting it on your body and having that conduction and that convection heating. And when it gets really hot, you actually want to have a jacket with insulation between you and the outside world. Now obviously if you can have cooling garments underneath that help bring the heat away, that's even better. But still, it's kind of one of those things. But of course, you always get the trade-off, especially in a city environment. When you're not moving and there's no airflow at all, then things get warm. But if you're moving at high speeds, things go good.